Hi there, it's time for the Commodore 64 compilation review, and as correctly predicted by a couple of you in the comments of my last review in this series, this time around we're entering the fourth dimension. Now this is a compilation released by Hewson Consultants in 1990 with a retail price of $12.99, and it features 4 games, unsurprisingly. But what's quite unique about this compilation is that all 4 of those games hadn't previously been released, so it's 4 new games effectively for this compilation. Let's take a look at it now and see what those games are like. And I should also mention that some of the creators of those games are quite well known in the Commodore 64 programming scene. Let's begin then by taking a look at the packaging in more detail. So let's just start. There's the Hewson Consultants logo there in the corner, nicely done. Bit of a price sticker residue there as well. We've got a big 4th dimension logo on it, and in the background is kind of some sci-fi fantasy artwork. So you've got planets in the background there, and if you look a bit more closely, there's kind of a futuristic looking city landscape there, so that's quite nice, looks good. And it also mentions on the corner there, A2 poster included and 4 great games. You think they'd mention the games first, really. I don't have the poster, so we won't be looking at that. Looking around the sides of the box, you can see it just says the 4th dimension on each side, and on this end here it tells you what system it's for. No surprise to find it's for the Commodore 64 tape in this case. So on the back, I've got that the right way around? No, I haven't. There we go. On the back we've just got the screenshots of lots of different games, and what happened here was that each system that it was released for, which was the Spectrum, Amstrad and Commodore 64, had its own selection of games on there. So you can see you've got Climax for the Spectrum, Battle Valley for the Amstrad, Anarchy for the Amstrad, and so on. And then you've got a couple of the Commodore 64 ones there, Cyberdyne Warrior and Insects in Space. Head the Ball was on the Spectrum and C64, bunch of other games for different systems there. And then you've got Mission Impossibubble, that's the 4th Commodore 64 game, and then a couple of other games. Now, all 4 games for the Commodore 64 were initially exclusive to this compilation. I'm not sure that was the case for the other systems, because I'm pretty sure Battle Valley and Anarchy had already been released as budget games, so it looks like Commodore 64 owners got the best end of the deal here, but that might not be a correct. Those games may have been released at budget price later on after this compilation came out. I don't think that's the case though. At the bottom there we've got some just copyright information published by Hewson Consultants 1990, I've already mentioned that. So let's take a look inside and see what the instructions are like. So before I look at the instructions, this is what the inside of the box looks like. So there's space for 2 cassettes there, but you only get 1, so there's 2 games on each side, which I think is a little bit cheap when you consider that the compilation cost £13. I feel like they could have put 2 tapes in there. It's got that big box look, and then when you get inside it, just the 1 tape. A little bit on the stingy side, I think. But anyway, let's have a look at the instruction booklet. Same artwork as on the front cover, and you've got instructions for all the games in one booklet. So what they've basically done here is it's one set of packaging, and the only thing that distinguishes it between systems is that sticker on the end, and also obviously the games that are on the cassette included. So you can see you've got instructions in lots of different languages for all the different games. I'm not going to go into these in too much detail, but let's just have a look at one set of instructions for one of the C64 games. Cyberdyne Warrior, you've got a big introduction section there, operating instructions, all the controls, title screen details, keyboard controls, in-game operation, details about the status bar, and so on. So you've got a couple of pages for that game, shop description and lots more information there, things about picking up droids and special features, so lots of detailed instructions. This is another one of the Commodore 64 games, and also the Spectrum, Head the Ball, and again you see a big introduction, backstory, controls, scoring information, all that kind of stuff. So pretty comprehensive instructions for each of the games. The booklet's like, I don't know, how many pages is that? 56, so more than 60 pages probably for the booklet in the different languages. Nice and solid, nice shiny front cover, lots of information about all the games, so really good stuff with the instructions. A little bit I don't know, I don't quite know what I feel about the box in terms of it just being sort of generic to cover all 3 systems. I think that could have been done better, but overall it looks nice, there's no doubt about that. I've got that upside down again. But I think just like only having 1 cassette and no details about the games on the back, just the screenshots, just it lacks a little bit for a compilation that cost 13 quid, I think. But anyway, that's enough of talking about the packaging. Let's take a look at the 4 games that are included on this compilation, which, as I've said, are all exclusives. No adverts I could find for this one, so let's dive straight in and look at the first game. Since there's no obvious order to look at the games based on the front cover, I'm going to go based on the screenshots on the back, and that means first up is Cyberdyne Warrior, which was developed by John and Steve Rowlands, aka Apex Computer Productions, who produced Retrograde for Thalamus in 1989 and would go on to produce games like Creatures and Mayhem in Monsterland.
The game is based around 3 planets, each with an orbiting prison satellite. Captive droids have escaped the satellite and beamed down to the planets below. As the transporters they use were built for humans only, the droids' self-destruct mechanisms were accidentally activated, and unless the droids are recovered within the time limit, the planet will be destroyed. The player controls the Cyberdyne Warrior, and it's up to you to locate the droids and return them to the satellite. The planets have numerous hostile inhabitants who may have to be destroyed in order to reach the droids. You have at your disposal a machine gun which can have its speed and caliber modified, with extra ammunition also available. It's possible to increase the time before the droids self-destruct, and you may also purchase energy which may have been lost coming into contact with enemies on the planet. In order to purchase items, you must collect money from the planet and transport to the satellite with at least 1 droid. From there you're presented with a menu of items that you can buy. After stocking up, you then return to the planet to continue your mission until all the droids are recovered. Like all the games Apex produced, this one's got fantastic graphics with lovely landscapes in their signature style, varied enemies and great animation. The main character sprite looks very similar to the one they used in Retrograde, which was developed at roughly the same time as this game. There's some pretty decent sounds in game, and some good SID tunes are played on the title screen and between stages. The game itself is a flick screen platformer with run and gun elements, and it's one of those games that you benefit from mapping out, as there are a lot of blind leaps and jumps that can lead to you landing on enemies that drain your health. It's quite unfair at times as you have no idea what you're landing on, and there are a couple of places where you can get stuck leading to a quick death as you only have 1 life and your energy bar can drain quickly. There are several areas where pixel perfect jumping is required, and there's only 1 route through the first level back to the shop, so you end up retracing your steps a lot. With limited ammunition and only 1 life, many of the visits you make to the shop you just end up spending all your credits on replenishing health and ammo. You'll soon learn that you need to pick what to dodge and what to shoot to conserve the latter. I played this game a number of times without making progress and was getting really frustrated, but then it suddenly clicked. The way to make progress initially is to collect 1 droid and then get back to the shop, collecting enough coins along the way to enable you to power up the caliber of your weapon. This then allows you to destroy some enemies that you can't with the lower caliber, allowing you to access other parts of the level more easily. Eventually I worked my way through the first stage and got to the second one, which looks great with a total change of environment and lots of new enemies. It doesn't get any easier though, as your ammo, energy and time limit don't reset between levels, so you can start off the next stage in a bad way, and that's another thing you have to learn as you play, as you couldn't possibly know that the first time around. Cyberdyne Warrior is a great looking and sounding game which will attract you to it immediately. It is very tough, but it's one that you do improve with each time you play, and the longer I stuck with it, the more I enjoyed it. Next up we have Insects in Space, and this was developed by another big name in Commodore 64 programming, Sensible Software, who were obviously well known for games like Whizball and Parallax by this point, and went on to do many more great games in the 8 and 16-bit era. The backstory for this game, and I'm reading it straight from the instruction manual, says once upon a time, deep in the heart of Germany, there lived a big-breasted angelic woman called Helen Bach. Thousands of years later, long after she'd passed away, Earth was invaded by a strange race of insects intent on populating the planet. They'd reached every corner of the world and decimated except for a remote valley in the middle of Rhineland. The insect's deadly poison didn't affect small babies in this area due to their diet of local grape juice, so they survived. Saint Helen heard the distant cries of the poor babies from space and has travelled to Earth in a last desperate bid to save mankind. She has to stop the bees from grabbing the babies, taking them to a great height and dropping them to the ground. If she shoots a bee while it's carrying a baby, the baby will fall to its death unless it's caught by Helen and returned safely. There are 2 landscapes at the top and bottom of the screen, and the babies must be returned to the landscape they were snatched from. If the bees are left to carry the babies for too long, they'll not only drop them but also give birth to a flight that will cause Helen extra hassle. To combat the evil insects, St. Helen is equipped with laser vision and a smart bomb that can be used once per life. She's also able to conjure up a magical circle of space-time continuum dust by holding down the fire button. This enables Helen to travel to another part of the play area by continuing to hold down the fire button as she enters the circle. If Helen's carrying 1 or more babies at a time, she can save them by entering a dust circle without holding the fire button down, keeping them out of the clutches of the evil insects. At this time she's also gifted with a bonus dependent on the number and combination of top and bottom babies she holds. In order to progress to the next level, Helen must eliminate all the enemies and save as many babies as possible. You've no doubt already worked this out from looking at the footage, but this is Sensible Software's take on Defender. But it seems like they thought to themselves, let's make Defender but ramp up the difficulty by making you have to keep an eye on the top and bottom of the screen. It's got a near vertical difficulty curve as things start off hard and just get even harder as the levels progress. The babies don't replenish between stages, so you'll end up losing them all by the 3rd stage unless you're really on your game. You only get 3 lives and can get killed by so many different things, often before you have a chance to react to them. The game looks and sounds great, with a nice title screen that has a distinctive Sensible Software look, and a great title tune that begins with an authentic sounding insect buzzing noise. In-game the graphics look really good, especially with the animation on your buxom character, and the sound effects are decent, though some seem like they've been reused from other Sensible Software games. The fast scrolling and tight controls mean it's easy to move around, but also you can often fire into bullets before you have a chance to avoid them. You also need to pay close attention to the radar to have any chance in the game, but it's hard to do that when there's so many enemies and bullets on screen. As you'd expect from Sensible Software, this is a very polished game, but it's just too difficult for all but the most hardcore player, and I found myself losing patience with it quite quickly. Let's move on to the third game in this compilation. This is Head the Ball, and this was also coded by a big name on the Commodore 64, Graphgold, although perhaps not by their most famous programmer because this one was coded by Jason Page. You take control of Head with your main objective being to rescue your girlfriend from Gobber's clutches. To accomplish this you'll need to negotiate the Globoid's territory and the nailheads who inhabit it. To make your task easier, you're able to bounce yourself into the air so that you can jump over things. You also have limited firepower in the shape of 10 single shots and 2 smart bombs, along with a shield which can only be used once but protects you from lethal enemy contact. As you bound your way through the levels you'll come across gems, and these should be collected as you'll need something to offer Gobber for the return of your beloved. Each level of the Globoid's territory also has to be negotiated in a set time. To bounce yourself over tall objects and across long distances, you increase your bounce height by pushing up on the joystick and then push left or right to redirect the jump. To change between weapons, pull down on the joystick and the current weapon status will cycle through fire, bomb and shield. Pressing fire then activates the chosen weapon. Like all the other games in this compilation, this one looks good right from the start. The presentation is great with an excellent title screen that features music and pre and post level jingles. Once you get into the game it features cute, well drawn and nicely animated graphics across the board. The control of your character is quite tricky and takes a while to get used to. You can sometimes fail to jump as high as you intended to and drop down gaps or hit enemies. The choice of weapons is good, but they must be used carefully, as if you die too many times before completing a level you'll probably run out. When you get towards the end of the stage you're able to choose from 3 paths to the end of the level, and that's a nice feature that adds replayability. After completing a level there's a shoot 'em up bonus stage which is a nice change of pace. It's simple, fun and good for boosting both lives and points. This is another tough game even on the first level, and I couldn't get past the second. You're going to need lots of practice and perseverance to make progress in this one. You also need really good timing to stop you colliding with enemies, and it can sometimes be frustrating to lose lives from getting stuck below scenery mid-bounce. You'll also need to pick and choose when to use the weapons and which ones to pick carefully, as some areas seem to be impossible to get past without them. Overall I'd say Head the Ball is a good game. It's well programmed and playable. There's just a few niggles with the controls and level layouts that stop it from being really great. The final game on the 4th Dimension compilation is Mission Impossibubble, which is a humorous spin on a well-known franchise title. This was programmed by Martin Sneap, a lesser known developer than some of the other famous names on this compilation. He only did a few games for the Commodore 64, the most well known of which is probably Knucklebusters. The aim of the game is to locate, rescue and return a little lost bubble from somewhere inside each of 6 mazes. To do this you must first find the 8 pieces of a scroll that have been broken up and spread across the maze. These pieces can only be collected in a certain order, which is up to you to discover. The mazes are heavily guarded by a host of different and deadly enemies, all intent in stopping you from completing your mission. Along the way you'll occasionally find magic toadstools which when picked up give you increased bubble power to blow away your enemies. To help you navigate the maze there are teleports which resemble sparkling clouds of magic. These will transport you to specific places in the current maze, but their trajectories are set so you'll have to learn where each teleport takes you to be able to get through the mazes successfully. You also possess a guidance system in the form of a simple compass that points the direction to the next scroll piece, but it only gives a rough indication of the direction you must travel in. To top it all off, you only have a short time to complete your rescue mission in each maze. Mission Impossibubble maintains the high visual standards of all the games on this compilation. The presentation is excellent, with a title screen with music and a really nice status bar with the pictures of the main character at the bottom that diminish as you lose lives. The in-game graphics are also really well drawn, especially the detail on the maze floors that give it a 3D platform effect. The main character is a little evil looking though, and the enemies are quite repetitive. There's no music in game and the sounds are pretty simple but fit the game well, and there are some jingles between levels. As I'm sure you'll know if you've been a long time subscriber to my channel, I'm not a big fan of the isometric perspective in video games, but in this one it's not really an issue. I wouldn't say it's particularly necessary, but it's also not problematic as the maze is generally only one block wide and easy to negotiate. There are a few areas where you can't see very clearly though, as the screen doesn't stay centred on your character. The gameplay in this one is fairly simple. You just collect the scrolls, pick up the baby and then find the exit, which was where you started from. The teleporters can be annoying as they bounce you around all over the place, but they're just designed to slow your progress until you learn the routes through. Collecting the scroll pieces in the correct order is also just designed to slow you down and make the levels last longer. The biggest problem with the game is that enemies can spawn underneath you or very near and kill you, which is especially problematic when your weapon's low powered. Once you've powered it up, you just have to continually fire as you roam the maze and hope nothing spawns too close. Your weapon power does remain if you lose a life, so that's a good thing, and the timer also resets, so that renders it pretty pointless in the context of the game. Each level offers something new visually, and the Bounder themed second level was fun and gave me a laugh when I first saw it. I managed to get to the third level where the enemy speed and spawn rate ramps up. It's also a much bigger maze and I couldn't find the first scroll piece before I ran out of lives. This is a fairly playable maze game, but it's quite repetitive, so it gets a bit boring endlessly wandering around. It would have benefited from some more variety in the enemies and more things to interact with, such as jump pads for example. The simple game design probably shows the relative inexperience of the programmer, but it's not a terrible game by any means. That completes my detailed look at the 4 games on the 4th dimension. It was an interesting idea to put 4 brand new titles on a compilation, the logic probably being that they were too good to be put out as budget games but not quite good enough to be standalone full price ones. That said, they all have quite a bit of depth to them and are well made, despite all having a fairly high difficulty level. And with that, let's move on to the ratings. As I've already mentioned, all these games are quite tough, but let's be honest, that was the norm for 8-bit games, so I'm not going to be marking them down too much for the high difficulty level. As always, I'll begin with individual ratings for the games on the compilation, and first up, Cyberdyne Warrior. Well, it's initially difficult and can be frustrating, but once you seriously invest some time into it and learn the level layouts and tricks, you can make some good progress. The game also looks fantastic and is a standout in this package for me, and I'm giving it a score of 8 out of 10. Insects in Space is an interesting twist on Defender with some great graphics and incredibly challenging gameplay. It's very well made, but it is ultimately just a variant of a game that was almost a decade old in 1990, so I can't give it a score of any more than 7. Head the Ball is a well programmed and visually impressive platformer, but the game design is a little flawed and it needs a lot of practice to master even the early stages. I'm going to give that 7 out of 10 as well. And finally, Mission Impossibubble is another really nice looking game, but the simple maze based collect 'em up gameplay is a little dull, which makes it the worst game on the compilation for me, but it's still worth a score of 6. Moving over to the overall compilation rating then, and firstly the packaging. It's a nice looking big box with great cover art and detailed instructions, but they did cheap out a bit on having the same box for all formats and only having a single tape. So it's decent, but I'd expect slightly better for a $12.99 retail price, so I'm going to give it a score of 8 out of 10. The average rating for the 4 games comes out at 7, and in terms of value for money, well, 4 games for £13 puts them just a little above budget price per game, and they're all as good or better than most budget games of the era. If the retail price had been a tenner, then I would have given this 10 out of 10 for sure, but the slightly higher price may have put me off compared to other compilations you could get at the time, so I'm going to give it 9 out of 10, and that means the overall rating for this compilation is 76%. Let's now take a look at what the games magazines thought of this compilation back when it was originally released. I'm going to start with the March 1990 edition of Zap64, and they gave it a colossal 3-page review, which obviously didn't look exactly like I'm showing it here. I just put all 3 pages on the screen at once to make it easier. This review is obviously extensive, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but let's start by looking at the introduction that explains the format. It begins by saying what would happen if you went round some of the C64's top programmers and asked for a budget game each, and it makes the point that I did earlier about the games not quite being good enough for full price, but better than the average budget game. It goes on to say Hewson asked that question of Graph Gold, Sensible Software, Apex Computer Productions, and a relative unknown, Martin Sneap, and 4th Dimension is the result. Just as I've been saying, they mentioned that the quality of presentation is universally excellent and playability is amazing. A dash of originality and a few more levels could turn any of the games into worthy full price releases. It rounds off the introduction by explaining the format of the review, which is basically that they reviewed each game individually in the same manner as budget ones, and as a result of being slightly more generous than they would be if they were full price games. First up, they look at Cyberdyne Warrior and they give it an overall score of 90%, saying a surprisingly addictive blast 'em up come platforms and ladders game. There aren't actually any ladders in it though. And just to pick out a few of the reviewer comments, Stu said that the size of the planets mean you've got to do plenty of exploration, and there's also a strong tactical element in judging when to return to the shop and which upgrades to buy, which is something I mentioned when I was talking about it. And Robin Hogg makes a special point of mentioning Level 2's jungle, saying it's superb with bats, bubbling lava and palm trees, rounding up his comments by saying it's great blast 'em stuff which tests both joystick precision and tactical thinking. That 90% score might be a little bit higher than my 8 out of 10, but in general I agree with all their comments and think that's a fair score for the game at that point in time. Moving on to the second page, and it's the review of Insects in Space, and there's a couple of screenshots of this one along with another screenshot of Cyberdyne Warrior at the bottom. Like the first game, all three reviewers have something to say about this one, and I'm going to focus on Phil's review here, saying Insects is a neat and very playable Defender variant. Attractive graphics add a lot to the simple appeal with some great insects, and the topless Helen looks like she's been stung by a couple of extra large bees. He goes on to say this isn't just Defender with different graphics, though I can't say I completely agree with that. He says the dust cloud is a good idea, although often it's as dangerous as it is useful, while the dual planet surfaces add something new too. Add a dose of sick humour and some over-the-top arcade sound effects and you get instant insects appeal, and he rounds it off by saying it's his personal favourite of the 4 games. The other 2 reviewers say much the same, likening it to games like Drop Zone and Stargate as well as Defender of course, and they give the game an overall score of 94%, saying killing insects has never been so much fun. As I said earlier, this is effectively just a Defender clone, and Defender had been around for almost a decade at this point, so to give it a near perfect score seems completely over the top, and I do wonder how much it has to do with the fact that this game was created by media darling Sensible Software. The third page of the review covers the last 2 games in the compilation with more colourful screenshots and comments from all 3 reviewers on both games. For Mission Impossibubble, Phil says the search and find gameplay is very easy to get into but surprisingly tough, and he couldn't get past the second level, which I was a little bit surprised at because I got past the second level on my 3rd attempt I think. Rob says Insects in Space may be the best in the pack, but Mission Impossibubble isn't far behind. There may only be 6 levels, but they're all quite different, and he goes on to say the unpredictable appearance of the baddies breaks up the basic maze game, making it a tough shoot 'em up as well. Again, I'm a little bit surprised by that comment too, because I didn't think the appearance of the baddies was unpredictable at all. They pop up everywhere all the time. Stu's comments mentioned the great graphics and scrolling, which I totally agree with, but he then goes on to say the gameplay is similarly top class, which I can't really agree with. I felt the gameplay was pretty simplistic and repetitive myself. They give this game 90%, describing it as pure entertainment, and well, again, I think that's a little bit on the high side. This for me was the worst of the 4 games, despite still being reasonably good. And finally for Head the Ball, they give it an overall score of 84%, describing it as the weakest game on the compilation, but still very playable. Again, I don't agree with that, but I do agree with some of the comments the reviewers have made. For example, Stu says this is maddening, mistakes are so easy to make and often send you back quite a bit. What's worse, dying doesn't restore any of your weapons, but at least the sub-game's a satisfying blast, and I can't argue with any of those comments. So overall from Zap, it's a very comprehensive and praiseworthy review of all 4 games. I don't necessarily agree with all the scores and comments, but I think at the time you couldn't have been anything other than impressed with this compilation of 4 brand new games for a pretty reasonable price. For the second magazine review, I'm moving on to Your Commodore Issue 68 from May 1990, and they didn't quite give the compilation the same treatment as Zap did, but it did get a 2-page review, albeit with no colour. I'm not hugely impressed with the layout of this one. There's some grainy screenshots of 3 of the 4 games and then a hugely expanded one for Mission Impossibubble, which seems like an odd choice given that's one of the weaker games on the compilation. There's also an annoying crisscross pattern in the background of half of the first page of the review, which makes the text really hard to read. The other issue is when you do actually read the text, you find that most of it's just waffle about the gameplay and there's not actually much critique of the 4 games. As a result, I'm only going to pick out a few odd comments from this one. The first one being the caption on the screenshot of Head the Ball, which like Zap suggests it's possibly the weakest in the pack, which again I don't agree with. After several paragraphs describing how to play Insects in Space, it's summed up by saying apart from the scenery and babies on the roof of the world, this is almost a perfect Defender clone. In contrast, Head the Ball only gets a couple of paragraphs to describe it and no critique whatsoever. They then move on to Cyberdyne Warrior, which gets quite a big write-up, but then it's summed up by just one sentence saying it's a hard game but nevertheless fun and highly destructive. And finally for Mission Impossibubble, there's a reasonable amount of information given and it's summed up by saying a nice combination of arcade blasting combined with a little puzzle solving. The reviews then round up by saying 4 great games make this compilation of original material a must for any gamer no matter what their style. And rather than giving each game an individual rating, they just give the compilation an overall score of a whopping 96%. It's good, but I don't think it was that good even back then. I don't think they really say enough to justify why they've given it that score. That just about brings this episode of the Commodore 64 compilation comparison to an end, with the one final thing to do being to take a look at where the 4th dimension features in my compilation rankings league table. As I mentioned in the last episode, I'm now splitting up the rankings between full price and budget price compilations, and obviously this was a full price one, so let's take a look at where it places in the league table for full price compilations, and as you can see it's gone in at 3rd place, above Arcade Hall of Fame and below We Are the Champions, with a score of 76%. I think that's bang on because I'd rate it as the 3rd best of the compilations I've played so far in this series. And just to round things off, let's take a look at the larger league table that covers both full price and budget compilations. No surprise that it's gone in at 3rd place on that league table as well, because all the budget compilations are far inferior to the full price ones I've reviewed to date. If you've got any thoughts about the 4th dimension compilation and the games contained within it, if you agree with my thoughts or not, then please leave a comment and let me know. I'll be back with another Commodore 64 compilation review in about a month's time, and until then stay tuned for more retro gaming content each week. Thanks very much for watching this video, and until the next time, see ya!